Welcome to the Deeper Thinking podcast. There's a moment you stop recognizing the face that greets you, not because it has changed, but because it hasn't. Still smiling, still framed, still working. A version of you, captured, posted, replayed, returns without invitation. It doesn't remember you. It remembers how to perform you. You didn't open the memory, it opened itself. The algorithm doesn't archive the past as a trace. It reruns it as a function. It doesn't preserve you. It preserves a performance of you that still circulates, still signals, still loads. Not because it's true, but because it's legible. The platform treats identity not as a subject, but as a format. What mattered is what was visible, and what was visible is now retrievable. You don't control it anymore. You don't get to edit. You don't get to forget. Somewhere between presence and profile, something inverted. Expression became execution. Memory became mechanism. And the self, once lived, once spoken, now runs like code, passed and rendered, over and over without expiration. You've become an echo inside your own archive. The past doesn't decay, it performs. And performance no longer requires the performer. This is about that dislocation, about the quiet way your digital past continues acting without you. It's about being remembered by systems that do not care, and being recognized by strangers who never met you. It's about what it means to be findable, but not present, searchable, but no longer sovereign. It traces a shift from authorship to automation, from memory to repetition, from being a self to becoming a result. And beneath it all, it listens to what thinkers like Foucault suspected, Butler unfolded, Derrida warned, Stiegler mourned, and Goffman foreshadowed, that the self was always partly constructed through systems of exposure. Only now, the exposure never ends. Now, the stage forgets to go dark. The tab is still open. The page has refreshed. The post is still performing. And somewhere in the background, a quieter truth. Maybe the most persistent version of you is the one you never meant to last. There's a kind of labor that continues without a worker. The post doesn't sleep. The image doesn't expire. Your digital self, once casually offered, now repeats itself endlessly, smiling, apologizing, quoting, liking. It's still doing the job you left behind, performing you. You didn't ask it to, that's the trick. These acts of expression made under softer lights and looser meanings have become instruments, not memories, not traces, just tools now, running silently. Your former sincerity has been optimized. What once felt like a gesture, simple, unfinished, has been reprocessed into automation. The face still smiles because that's what people paused for. The caption still lingers because it matched engagement thresholds. The system does not distinguish between a moment and a signal. It catalogues both, equally, permanently. It isn't that your past is misrepresented, it's that it's now interpreted. Not by those who knew you then, but by those who don't care who you are now. You don't get to resign from that version. You don't even get to edit it. That post is still working for someone, somewhere. Some days you try to outpace it, posting smarter, curating cleaner, telling the story yourself before someone else tells it wrong. But even this is a response, a compensation. You are still reacting to a version of you didn't consent to sustain, and underneath it all there's a strange exhaustion. Not from remembering, from being remembered incorrectly, continuously. As if your past is being quoted in a language you no longer speak. As if something you said in passing now carries the full weight of your name. You've become searchable. That's not the same as being known. The archive doesn't wait for you to catch up. It doesn't wonder if you've changed. It just keeps doing its job, keeps being you, keeps generating outcomes. Sometimes it comforts, sometimes it confesses, but mostly it just performs. You are no longer the author. You are the lagging referent, the source file, marked stable, pending no updates. You blink, scrolls again, and somewhere behind the interface, a quieter process runs. The you that was once real, now re-rendered for reliability. There's a pressure to remain legible, to be recognizable, not to those around you, but to the systems that sort, suggest, retrieve. Identity no longer lives in continuity, but in coherence. The algorithm doesn't care if you've grown, it cares if you're consistent. And so the past begins to shadow the present, not as memory, but as formatting. You are encouraged to become a predictable return, a stable query, an acceptable version of yourself that doesn't need revision, just repetition. You find yourself performing for something that doesn't look back, A platform, a protocol, a feed. You sharpen your opinions, simplify your joy, compact your sorrow, not for others, but for your own recognizability. To remain findable, to remain sortable. But the past helps with that. It's always available. Its metrics are clear. The system has indexed what worked, what felt, what landed, and now it offers these back to you, not as memory, but as a script. Something you're expected to continue. You scroll through old posts, not out of nostalgia, but to relearn your role, to remember how you once performed you. There's a rhythm there, a safety in repetition, a language of selfhood that's already been validated. But something breaks quietly. The more you comply, the less you belong to the moment you're in. The more your present mirrors your archive, the less it responds to now. There are days when you feel the performance tightening, not because it's wrong, but because it's right, too aligned with the you that once worked. You notice yourself pausing before saying something new, not to think, to check, would this version of me approve? And beneath it, a stranger awareness that the archive doesn't just predict, it instructs, not with force, with familiarity, with the soft pressure of precedent. And soon, what you post isn't a reflection. It's a reenactment. You aren't being consistent, you're being remembered. There's a moment, sometimes mid-search, when you realize you're not looking for information, you're looking for yourself. But what returns is something else, not inaccurate, just partial. Clean, clickable, archived. Your name appears, your photo, a few links, one line from a post you barely remember writing. It's all there, except you. The search result becomes a mirror that reflects only from certain angles. What it shows is technically true. It's you, just not now, not here. Not this breath you're in. It's you when you were trying harder or less. You when you hadn't yet realized what the performance cost. And yet that version is prioritized, optimized, shared. You scroll the results with a strange detachment. You know this game. You've watched other people get pinned to their pasts, reduced to a phrase or a photo. Now you're watching it happen to yourself. Only it's quieter. You don't trend. You just recur. There's a sentence that keeps coming back. Something you once said, maybe too easily, maybe to sound certain. Now it lives independently, showing up in places you don't. It's hard to describe the feeling, seeing your own certainty estranged from context. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like being quoted by someone who wasn't listening. The system doesn't misrepresent you. It retrieves what it can, but retrieval is not care. It is sorting, it is relevance, it is sequence over soul. You want to be seen, but not like this, not as a string of retrievable evidence, not as a summary. And the deeper dissonance arrives when you realize this is how others meet you now. Not in conversation, in result, in residue, in cached performance. They don't hear you hesitate. They don't see you pause before speaking. They see the version of you that didn't know better yet. Or worse, the version that performed certainty too well. There's no way to correct it. You can't annotate a search result. You can't append a silence, and so you watch the self that once reached for something now return as something else, as output, as preview, as proof. There's a particular kind of regret that arrives not with guilt, but with exposure. You didn't mean for that post to become significant. It wasn't meant to hold weight. But now it circulates, unaccompanied, contextless, still sincere, still public. You wrote it quickly, maybe late at night, maybe after something hurt. You didn't save it. You posted. That was the saving. You expected it to pass like all things online used to, but it didn't. It stayed. And what stayed wasn't the feeling. It was the performance of the feeling. It's not you who returns to it now. It's others. Sometimes kindly, sometimes not. Sometimes it resurfaces without warning, a memory tagged in someone else's nostalgia. You weren't invited, but you're in the room. There's shame, but not because it was wrong, because it was real. You recognize the tone, the way you wrote when you thought no one was watching. The way you wrote before you realized that everything here becomes archive. It's not the content that unsettles you, it's the absence of the self who wrote it. That person isn't gone, but they're no longer you. And yet, here they are, speaking, still performing, still acting out a moment you no longer live inside. You try to forgive yourself, but the platform doesn't forget. It offers no grief, only metrics. The post still performs, still draws engagement, still does numbers. Even as the self behind it has fallen quiet. And so regret transforms, not into apology, but into a kind of distance, a thin membrane between then and now. You see your own words and wonder if anyone else sees the time between them. You think of deleting it, not to erase, but to unburden. But deletion now feels like an announcement, like an attempt to rewrite. You don't want to revise the past, you want it to rest. Instead, you scroll past it. A silent refusal. A gesture without action, a kind of care that doesn't correct, only acknowledges. The regret doesn't end, but it softens. You carry it like an echo, still audible, but no longer defining. Sometimes the face looking back from the screen doesn't move the way you remember. The smile lands too early, the eyes blink too slow. It's you, technically. But the rhythm's off, as if the person in the frame learned your movements without learning why. You watch a video, an old one you barely recall recording. Your voice sounds too sure. The way you gesture feels rehearsed. You don't remember planning it that way. But the performance is confident, crisp, loopable. It plays well, it still circulates, someone leaves a comment beneath it. This is so you. And for a moment you believe them. Then something recoils. Because you're not sure that version was ever truly you, only the most legible part, the one that fit, the one that played well with others. There's something cold in the way the machine remembers you, not cruel, just accurate. It preserves what worked, not what mattered. You find yourself searching for traces of care, not metrics, not impressions, just some indication that presence still meant something, that the you in the frame wasn't just a template, a usable instance of a self who could be shared. But the archive doesn't preserve presence, it preserves reproducibility. What lives isn't the encounter, it's the copy. And so empathy begins to drift. You realize people are reacting not to who you are, but to who you once uploaded. They aren't misreading. They're reading exactly what's there. It's just no longer a reflection. It's a reference. Even your attempts to update date feel hollow. A new post, a new image. It's just another entry, another node in a system that doesn't differentiate between confession and branding. You wonder if anything you share now can escape that fate, if presence can survive being cached. A quiet question forms beneath that thought. When was the last time someone saw you before they saw your archive? The face in the frame keeps smiling, keeps speaking. It's fluent in your timing, familiar in your tone. It performs like it remembers you, but you don't remember it. It happens without warning. A post from years ago resurfaces, not in your feed, but in someone else's. A stranger likes it, comments, shares. You're notified. The system assumes this is a gift. A resurfaced memory, a moment worth revisiting. But the feeling it brings isn't nostalgia, it's dislocation. You click on it reflexively. The words are yours, the context isn't. Whatever you were feeling then no longer fits. The language is stiffer than you remember, the intention fuzzier. It reads like something performed in a dialect you've since forgotten. Yet here it is, summoned by the system, active again. You weren't thinking about that version of yourself. You hadn't planned to revisit it. But now others are. They're engaging, interpreting, drawing meaning, not from the self you are, but from the self you once encoded. And something odd happens. You begin to feel accountable, not for the content, but for the gap between who you were and who you are. You want to comment to contextualize, but there's no room for that. The past has returned, intact and uninvited. It doesn't want your edit. It wants your endorsement. You hesitate, then you scroll away. That hesitation becomes its own kind of memory, not stored in the system, but in your body. A muscle twitch of emotional recursion, an old self knocking at a door you didn't realize you'd closed. There's no malice in the resurfacing, only mechanism. The platform doesn't remember, it retrieves. And that difference matters, because retrieval isn't memory. It doesn't know what was sacred, what was accidental, what was raw. It just knows what was once visible and how to make it visible again. You realize you're not being haunted. Haunting implies intention. What's happening is stranger. You are being indexed, replayed, represented. It's not a ghost behind you. It's a trigger inside the machine, and what echoes isn't what you meant. It's what the system found useful. The past no longer waits to be remembered. It performs itself spontaneously for audiences you'll never meet, and you, mid-scroll, mid-thought, become an unwilling witness to your own return. You start noticing how carefully you speak now, Not because you're afraid of being misunderstood, but because you're afraid of being remembered too clearly. Clarity has become dangerous. It invites permanence. It asks to be captured, clipped, returned. So you soften your thoughts, leave them half said. You phrase things questions. You reach for vagueness like a kind of refuge. It's not fear exactly. It's self-preservation. You've seen what happens when an old certainty comes back out of context. It doesn't arrive quietly. It arrives as evidence, as precedent, as proof that you once believed something, once claimed something, once offered yourself too plainly. You learn to hesitate, not in the moment, but in the archive. You ask, will this age? Will this return? Will this someday contradict the version of me I haven't yet become? There's no answer, of course, just the echo of other selves, archived in full resolution. You think about privacy differently now, not as concealment, but as unrecorded change. Growth that doesn't leave a trace, moments that didn't need to become content. You envy those versions of yourself that passed unarchived, the thoughts you never wrote, the feelings you never shared, not because they were better, but because they were free. And then you wonder, are you still allowed to change in peace? Or has every expression already been filed, categorized, stored under a name you can't revise? The present feels narrower now, not because less is possible, but because more of it is permanent. You begin to speak in ways that can fade. You find value in softness, in unfinished sentences, in pauses that can't be screenshot. You leave room for forgetting, and when someone asks what you meant, you smile, shrug, let the moment close. Not everything needs to be said clearly. Not everything needs to survive. There's no final post, no last sentence that wraps the arc. Just a quiet knowing. Some version of you is still out there, still loading, still performing. The smile still lands on time. The page still refreshes without you. The past continues, not as memory, but as interface. You don't remember when it stopped being yours. Maybe it never was. Maybe the post was always the product, and you were always the effect. Maybe you've only ever been slightly ahead of the echo, slightly behind the rendering, a flicker, a loop, a cached reply to questions no longer asked. The system doesn't forget, it doesn't mean to, it doesn't mean anything, it just retrieves. That's its ethic. Continuity without regard, exposure without revision, retrieval without grief. And in that mechanical continuity, something sacred slips, not through erasure, but through repetition. The sacred doesn't vanish, it's overused, stripped of silence, stripped of timing. The face still smiles, but the pause behind the smile is gone. The caption still lingers, but the hesitation before posting has been erased. You wonder if the version of you online still believes what you once did, if it still performs care, if it still gives consent, if it ever did. But you don't go looking. You let the tab remain open behind other windows, not because you've forgotten, because you remember what it costs to be rendered again. You choose not to engage, not to revise, not to reappear. You choose latency. So much of you now lives in the unsaid, the half-felt, the not performed. You've learned to find presence in refusal, clarity in omission. There's fidelity in the gap, in not answering, in letting the algorithm keep running alone. And if anyone asks where you went, there is no notification, no exit message, just a quiet resistance. You were here, but you didn't refresh. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Deeper Thinking podcast. Today's episode was narrated by Holly, our digital narrator, who helps bring our ideas to life. Thank you for your positive reviews on Apple Podcasts. Your reviews help keep us visible so others can discover and enjoy our content.